Japan, the way of the samurai and the steel dragon. Prologue. The land of the rising sun, an archipelago at the edge of the world, where every scrap of earth is wrestled from the sea and the mountains. Here, gods are born from rice paddies, and emperors trace their lineage to the sun itself. For 2,000 years, Japan developed in shadow, nearly invisible to the outside world. And then, in 50 years, it transformed from a medieval state into an empire capable of challenging the West. How did samurai, raised on a code of honor, become the builders of battleship fleets? How did a country that had never known defeat survive atomic bombing and rise from the ashes as an economic miracle? And why today, in an age of robots and skyscrapers, does the samurai spirit still live in every Japanese person? This is not just a story of survival. This is a story of how ancient traditions meet the future, and of the price that must be paid for greatness. Part 1. The Islands of the Gods. According to the ancient chronicles, Japan was created by gods. Izanagi and Izanami stood on the floating bridge of heaven and dipped a jeweled spear into the ocean below. When they lifted it, the brine that dripped from the tip formed the first island. The divine couple descended and gave birth to the rest of the archipelago. Their daughter, Amaterasu, the sun goddess, became the most revered deity in the heavenly pantheon. She sent her grandson to rule the islands. His great-grandson, Jimmu, became the first emperor. The year was 660 BC. So begins a history that has never been broken. Archaeology tells a different story. The first humans arrived 30,000 years before Christ. They walked across land bridges that connected Japan to Korea and Siberia. When the Ice Age ended, the seas rose. The bridges disappeared. The people were isolated. For thousands of years, they lived as hunter-gatherers, leaving behind mounds of shells and simple pottery. The Jomon culture endured for 10 millennia. They were one of the longest-lasting cultures in human history. In the 3rd century BC, a new people arrived from the continent. They brought rice farming, bronze mirrors, iron swords. They built huge tombs in the shape of keyholes, surrounded by moats, filled with treasures. These tombs mark the emergence of a ruling class. From these chieftains came the Yamato state, the first unified polity in Japanese history. In 538 AD, Buddhism arrived. A Korean king sent a statue of the Buddha and sutras to the Japanese court. The court split. Some saw the new faith as a threat to the native gods, the kami. Others saw opportunity. The Soga clan, which controlled the court, backed Buddhism. They won. Prince Shotoku, regent to the empress, built the Horyuji Temple, the oldest wooden building in the world. He drafted a constitution in 17 articles based on Buddhist and Confucian principles. The first article read, "Harmony is to be valued." In 710, the capital moved to Nara. The city was built on a Chinese grid. The court wore Chinese robes, wrote poetry in Chinese, copied Tang bureaucracy. But beneath the foreign veneer, a Japanese soul was forming. In 794, the capital moved again, to Heian-kyo, modern Kyoto. For 1,000 years, this would be the imperial seat. Here, the court aristocracy created a culture of exquisite refinement. Lady Murasaki wrote The Tale of Genji, the world's first novel. It tells of love, jealousy, and the sadness of fleeting beauty. But in the provinces, another class was rising. Warriors, samurai. In 1185, Minamoto no Yoritomo crushed his rivals in a sea battle. The emperor gave him the title shogun, barbarian subduing general. Yoritomo set up his government in Kamakura, far from the effete court in Kyoto. The age of warrior rule had begun. It would last nearly 700 years. Part 2. The Age of Warriors. After Minamoto's victory, Japan entered the Age of Warriors. The samurai became the new elite. Their code was called Bushido, the way of the warrior. 8 virtues: rectitude, courage, benevolence, respect, honesty, honor, loyalty, and self-control. Death for one's lord was the highest honor. The Kamakura shogunate ruled from the east. The emperor in Kyoto reigned but did not govern. For a century, peace held. Then, the impossible happened. In 1274, Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis, sent a fleet. 400 ships, 23,000 warriors. They landed on Kyushu. The samurai fought desperately, but the Mongols fought differently, with massed formations, artillery, coordinated attacks. The samurai, accustomed to individual combat, were outmatched. Night fell, a storm rose. A typhoon that the Japanese called kamikaze, the divine wind. The Mongol fleet was destroyed. 13,000 drowned. Japan was saved. 7 years later, the Mongols returned. A larger fleet, 4,000 ships, 140,000 warriors. Again, the kamikaze came. 2 days of storms. Almost the entire fleet sank. The Japanese believed their land was protected by the gods themselves. But divine protection did not save them from themselves. The Kamakura shogunate weakened. In 1333, Emperor Go-Daigo briefly restored imperial rule. It lasted 3 years. Then a new shogunate arose, the Ashikaga. They ruled from Kyoto, but their power was weak. The provinces slipped away. The 15th century, the 16th century. Japan descended into chaos. The Onin War, from 1467 to 1477, destroyed Kyoto. The shogun lost all authority. Local lords, daimyo, fought each other for land and power. The era was called Sengoku, the Warring States. Peasants fled to the mountains, cities burned, temples were destroyed. In this war of all against all, a new kind of warrior emerged. Not the idealistic knight of legend, but a brutal pragmatist. Samurai changed lords for profit. They betrayed, murdered, burned. The ideals of Bushido often died first. One of the most fearsome warriors was Takeda Shingen. He wore a horned helmet like a demon. His army was considered invincible. His battle standard bore the words Furinkazan, wind, forest, fire, mountain. Swift as the wind, silent as the forest, fierce as fire, immovable as the mountain. His eternal enemy was Uesugi Kenshin. Legend says that once, Kenshin's army was cut off from salt supplies. Shingen, learning of this, sent salt to his enemy. His advisors protested that they were at war. Shingen replied that war is fought with swords, not salt. In 1543, a Portuguese ship drifted to Tanegashima. Aboard were merchants and firearms. The Japanese called them iron arms. Within decades, Japanese smiths were making better guns than the Europeans. The old ways were dying. In 1573, Oda Nobunaga marched into Kyoto. He deposed the last Ashikaga shogun. He used the new weapons, muskets, massed infantry, disciplined troops. Samurai with swords against peasants with guns. The medieval age was ending. Part 3. The Three Unifiers. By the 16th century, Japan was a bloody pie cut into 300 pieces. Each piece was a domain with its own army, its own ambitions, its own daimyo. War had raged for 100 years. The country needed someone to stop the chaos. Oda Nobunaga was the son of a minor lord from Owari province. They called him the Fool of Owari. He dressed carelessly, ignored etiquette, befriended commoners. But he saw further than others. He understood that the age of samurai idealism was over. The future belonged to firearms, to discipline, to total war. In 1560, he had 2,000 soldiers. His enemy marched with 40,000. Everyone advised retreat. Nobunaga attacked. In a sudden storm, he caught the enemy off guard. He won. After that, he began an iron march across Japan. He burned monasteries if the monks resisted. He killed women and children in besieged castles. He welcomed Christian missionaries, seeing them as a counterweight to Buddhist monks. He said that if the bird does not sing, kill it. In 1575, at Nagashino, he deployed 3,000 musketeers behind wooden palisades. The famous Takeda cavalry charged. The guns fired in rotating volleys. The cavalry died. The age of the mounted samurai was over. By 1582, Nobunaga controlled half of Japan. He was 48 years old. Then betrayal came. One of his generals, Akechi Mitsuhide, turned against him. His army surrounded the temple in Kyoto where Nobunaga was staying. There was no escape. Nobunaga committed seppuku, ritual suicide. His last words were, "Ran, ran, chaos, chaos." The work of unification fell to a man born a peasant. Toyotomi Hideyoshi was small, ugly, with the face of a monkey. Nobunaga called him Monkey and valued his cunning and loyalty. Hideyoshi avenged his lord, defeated the traitor, and continued the march. He conquered Shikoku and Kyushu. He disarmed the peasants so that from then on, only samurai could carry swords. He surveyed the land and fixed peasants to their plots. But Hideyoshi suffered from megalomania. Deciding Japan was not enough, he invaded Korea in 1592. 2 campaigns followed: Korean guerrillas, Chinese armies, naval defeats. Hideyoshi died in 1598, never seeing victory. His last poem said, "Like dew I came, like dew I depart." Even Osaka Castle is a dream within a dream. After his death, the country teetered on the edge of war again. 2 powerful daimyo clashed at Sekigahara in 1600. Tokugawa Ieyasu, patient, cunning, a fox among wolves, crushed his rivals. 3 years later, he became shogun. His dynasty would rule Japan for 260 years. Ieyasu said that if the bird does not sing, wait until it sings. He knew how to wait. The 3 unifiers gave Japan peace, but the peace they built was a prison. The next 2 centuries would be the longest period of stability in Japanese history, and the longest isolation. The Tokugawa shogunate closed the country. No one could leave. No one could enter. The world outside froze. Inside, Japan dreamed. Part 4. The Closed Country. 1635. The 3rd Tokugawa shogun, Iemitsu, issued an edict that would shape Japan's destiny for 2 centuries. No Japanese could leave the country on pain of death. No foreigner could enter. The only exception was a handful of Dutch and Chinese merchants, confined to a tiny artificial island in Nagasaki harbor called Dejima. The reasons were fear. Fear of Christian missionaries, who the shogun believed were undermining his authority. Fear of European colonizers, who had already taken the Philippines and Indonesia. Fear of losing control. For over 200 years, Japan existed in voluntary isolation. Cherry blossoms bloomed, and no one outside the archipelago saw their beauty. Samurai sharpened their swords, but never used them in real battle. The country froze in time. Inside this frozen country, a remarkable culture developed. The city of Edo, modern Tokyo, became the largest city in the world, with 1 million people packed into wooden houses along narrow streets. It was a city of merchants, artisans, samurai, and the women of the floating world. The merchants grew rich, despite the samurai's contempt for trade. They had money but no status. They spent their wealth on entertainment in the pleasure quarters of Yoshiwara, On kabuki theatre, flamboyant and sensual, with male actors playing female roles. On ukiyo-e woodblock prints, pictures of the floating world showing beautiful women, famous actors, and landscapes. Hokusai painted the Great Wave off Kanagawa, a towering wave, Mount Fuji in the distance, fishermen in their boats. It became the image of Japan for the world, though the world would not see it until the isolation ended. The samurai became bureaucrats. They studied Confucius, wrote poetry, practiced tea ceremony. Their swords rusted in their scabbards. The Bushido code became more theory than practice. A samurai's highest duty was no longer dying in battle, but serving his lord in the castle administration. The peace had a cost: technological stagnation, scientific backwardness. When American ships would appear off the coast, the Japanese would see steamships and cannons that made their own weapons look like toys. But within the isolation, something precious was preserved. Aesthetic sensibilities refined over centuries. The tea ceremony, where every movement is choreographed and every object appreciated. The rock garden at Ryoanji in Kyoto, with 15 stones arranged in gravel so that from any angle you can see only 14. A puzzle, a meditation, a statement that the world is never fully visible. In 1720, the shogun relaxed the ban on foreign books. Dutch learning, rangaku, trickled in through Dejima. Japanese scholars studied Western medicine, astronomy, anatomy. They dissected corpses and compared what they saw with Chinese medical charts. They learned. But the shogunate remained suspicious. Reformers who pushed too hard were silenced. Thinkers who questioned too deeply were imprisoned. The system held until it couldn't. By the early 19th century, foreign ships appeared more frequently. Russians from the north, British whalers, Americans seeking coaling stations. They asked for trade, for water, for supplies. The shogunate refused. Their orders read to drive them away and not hesitate to fire. In 1853, 4 ships under black smoke entered Edo Bay. Their hulls were painted black, their cannons were visible. Their commander, Commodore Matthew Perry, carried a letter from the President of the United States demanding that Japan open its ports. The Japanese watched through telescopes. They saw the huge vessels, the guns, the foreign faces. They knew that the world they had built for 2 centuries was about to crumble. Part 5. The Black Ships and the Fall of the Shogunate. Commodore Perry did not ask, he demanded. If Japan refused to open its ports, the American fleet would bombard Edo. The Japanese saw the guns on the decks. They understood they could not resist. The shogunate capitulated, signed unequal treaties with America, then Britain, Russia, France. Foreigners flooded into the ports. Rice prices skyrocketed. Samurai lost income. Peasants starved. Uprisings swept the country. In the provinces, daimyo who had long resented Tokugawa rule saw their chance. Satsuma and Choshu in the south became centers of resistance. Their slogan was Sono Joy, revere the emperor, expel the barbarians. The irony was that they themselves bought weapons from the barbarians. In 1866, the shogun died. His successor tried to hold power, but it was too late. In January 1868, the armies of Satsuma and Choshu marched into Kyoto. The 16-year-old Emperor Meiji proclaimed the restoration of imperial rule. The shogunate fell. But war continued for another year. Shogun loyalists fought to the end. The city of Aizu burned to the ground. Samurai children took up weapons and died for their lord. The Byakutai, the White Tiger Corps, a group of teenage boys, watched their castle burn from a hilltop. Believing all was lost, they committed seppuku. Only later did they learn the castle had not fallen. When the dust settled, Japan lay in ruins. But from the ruins, something new was rising. The young emperor moved from ancient Kyoto to Edo, renamed Tokyo, meaning Eastern Capital. His task was one on which national survival depended, to transform a medieval country into a modern state in 50 years. The Meiji era, enlightened rule, had begun. The emperor swore an oath that knowledge shall be sought throughout the world. And Japan began to seek. With insane speed, with obsession, with the meticulousness only a people isolated for 2 centuries could muster. The samurai lost their privileges. They were forbidden to wear swords. They were given pensions that inflation quickly rendered worthless. Many became destitute, unable to do any work but fight. Some rebelled. The last samurai rebellion was led by Saigo Takamori, legendary warrior and hero of the Restoration. In 1877, his army marched on Tokyo. Imperial troops, armed with modern rifles, slaughtered the samurai with swords. Saigo was wounded and committed seppuku. The age of warriors was over. Peasants got land and crushing taxes. Their children went to mandatory schools. Girls studied alongside boys. By 1900, literacy in Japan rivaled Europe. In 1889, the emperor granted a constitution. Japan became the first Asian country with a parliament. True, the parliament had little power. The emperor remained sacred and inviolable. But the form was there. In 1894, Japan went to war with China over influence in Korea. The Japanese fleet, built in British yards, destroyed the Chinese navy. Japan gained Taiwan and the right to speak as an equal to the West. 10 years later came war with Russia. The vast Russian Empire against tiny Japan. Europe did not doubt the outcome. But Japan besieged Port Arthur, smashed the Russian army at Mukden, annihilated the Russian fleet at Tsushima. Admiral Togo hoisted the signal that the fate of the empire depended on this battle and that every man should do his utmost. The Russian ships went to the bottom. The Portsmouth Treaty gave Japan southern Sakhalin and influence in Korea. For the West, shock. For Asia, hope. Japan had proven that an Asian nation could defeat a European power. Part 6. The Liberal Twenties and the Military Turn. Emperor Meiji died in 1912. He had led Japan from feudalism to modernity. His funeral train passed through Tokyo as hundreds of thousands bowed. The era that followed was named Taisho, meaning great righteousness. And for a brief time, Japan experimented with something new. The First World War was a gift to Japan's economy. European factories worked for war, not exports. Their markets emptied. Japanese goods flooded Asia. Japanese shipping carried cargo across the oceans. Profits soared. In the cities, a new culture bloomed. Young people danced the foxtrot in Western clothes. Women cut their hair short and wore lipstick. Jazz played in cafes. Mobo and moga, modern boys and modern girls, strolled the Ginza. The first subway opened in Tokyo. Department stores sold goods from around the world. Political parties competed for power. Universal male suffrage came in 1925. Labor unions organized strikes. Women began demanding rights. For the first time, Japan tasted democracy. September 1st, 1923. 11:58 a.m. The Great Kanto earthquake struck. Tokyo and Yokohama shook for 4 minutes. Fires erupted everywhere from cooking fires, gas lines, chemical plants. The flames spread faster than people could run. A fire tornado swept through the army clothing depot, killing 38,000 who had taken refuge there. Across the 2 cities, 140,000 died. In the chaos, rumors spread that Koreans were poisoning wells and setting fires. Armed vigilantes set up roadblocks. They killed any Korean they found. 6,000 died, Some estimates say more. The government did nothing to stop it. The earthquake shattered more than buildings. It shattered confidence. The old certainties of progress, modernity, and the goodness of the West seemed hollow. Japan was vulnerable. Nature could destroy in minutes what man built over decades. Recovery came fast. By 1930, Tokyo was rebuilt, more modern than ever. But the economy stumbled. The Showa financial crisis in 1927 closed banks. The Great Depression hit Japanese exports hard. Silk prices collapsed, farmers starved, workers lost jobs. Young men wandered the cities, hungry and angry. In the countryside, right-wing ideologues preached a return to tradition. The West had corrupted Japan. Democracy was weak. The emperor was divine, so why should he share power with politicians? The army, once despised as backward, became a symbol of national pride. Young officers dreamed of a Showa restoration, a return to direct imperial rule, a purge of corrupt politicians and businessmen, a Japan that would conquer its own destiny. In 1931, the army acted. Without authorization from Tokyo, officers in Manchuria blew up a section of railway and blamed the Chinese. The Kwantung Army then conquered all of Manchuria. The civilian government in Tokyo tried to stop them. It failed. The public, fed on nationalist propaganda, cheered the army's success. In 1932, naval officers assassinated Prime Minister Inukai Tsuyoshi. The last party-based cabinet fell. From then on, the military's power only grew. February 26, 1936. Snow fell on Tokyo. Young officers led 1,500 soldiers to seize the city centre. They assassinated several elderly statesmen. They occupied the Diet, the Army Ministry, the Metropolitan Police. They demanded a new government loyal to the emperor. Emperor Hirohito was furious. He said he would personally lead the imperial guards to crush the rebels. The rebellion collapsed. The leaders were executed. But the result was not what the emperor wanted. The army used the uprising to tighten its control. The civilian government became a puppet. Censorship increased. Thought police arrested anyone suspected of leftist ideas. National mobilization began. In 1937, Japan launched a full-scale invasion of China. It would last 8 years and merge into the World War. The liberal 20s were dead. Part 7. The Road to War and the Pacific War. In 1937, the Japanese army marched into Nanjing. The city fell. What followed, the world would call the Rape of Nanjing. Hundreds of thousands of Chinese civilians and prisoners of war were murdered. Tens of thousands were raped. The world was horrified. Japan denied everything. The war with China dragged on. The Japanese army bogged down in endless territory. The Chinese government retreated inland and kept fighting. Japan needed resources, oil, rubber, metal. All were in Southeast Asia, controlled by European colonial powers. In 1940, Japan signed the Tripartite Pact with Germany and Italy. In 1941, after Japan occupied French Indochina, America imposed an oil embargo. Japan had oil reserves for 2 years. The choice was to retreat or to seize the oil fields of the Dutch East Indies, risking war with America. On December 7, 1941, a Japanese fleet approached Hawaii. 6 aircraft carriers, more than 300 planes. At 7:49 a.m., the strike leader radioed, "Tora, Tora, Tora," meaning, "Tiger, Tiger, Tiger." The code that surprise was complete. The American Pacific Fleet was shattered. 4 battleships sunk, 4 more damaged. 2,400 Americans dead. The next day, President Roosevelt called it a date which will live in infamy. America entered the war. For 6 months, Japan won everywhere. Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, Dutch East Indies, Burma. The Japanese army seemed invincible. Soldiers fought with fanaticism. They never surrendered. They preferred death to captivity. But America had resources. Factories ran around the clock. New ships launched faster than Japan could sink them. In May 1942, the Battle of the Coral Sea stopped the Japanese advance. In June, at Midway Atoll, Japan lost 4 aircraft carriers, the heart of its fleet. After Midway, Japan only retreated. Island by island, sea by sea. American submarines sank Japanese transports. The economy choked without oil and raw materials. Japanese soldiers fought with the desperation of the doomed. They did not surrender. They died in useless charges. Kamikaze pilots, young men just out of school, flew their planes into American ships, screaming, "Tenno Heika Banzai, long live the Emperor." By summer 1945, Japan lay in ruins. American bombers burned Japanese cities alive. Tokyo was destroyed in one night in March 1945. 100,000 died. The imperial palace survived by chance. On August 6, 1945, the B-29 bomber Enola Gay dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. 70,000 died instantly. Tens of thousands more died later from wounds and radiation. 3 days later, a second bomb fell on Nagasaki. On August 9th, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan and invaded Manchuria. The Kwantung Army, once the pride of the empire, was shattered in a week. On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito spoke to the nation by radio. No one had ever heard his voice. He said that the war had developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage. He announced surrender. Many officers killed themselves. The army wept. The country fell silent. On the deck of the battleship Missouri in Tokyo Bay, the Japanese delegation signed the surrender document. Foreign Minister Mamoru Shigemitsu signed with a trembling hand. General MacArthur said that these proceedings were closed and that they should pray for peace. Japan lay in ashes, cities burned, industry destroyed, millions homeless. American soldiers patrolled the streets. The living God had descended from heaven and declared he was human. Part 8. From the Ashes, Occupation and Economic Miracle. September 2nd, 1945. The deck of the battleship Missouri, Tokyo Bay. Japanese delegates in morning coats faced American officers in uniform. Foreign Minister Mamoru Shigemitsu signed the surrender document with a trembling hand. General Douglas MacArthur, Supreme Commander for the Allied Powers, signed for the victors. He said that peace should now be restored to the world. Japan lay in ruins. Cities were wastelands. Industry was destroyed. Millions were homeless. The economy had collapsed. People ate grasshoppers and sweet potato vines to survive. American soldiers patrolled the streets with chewing gum and chocolate. The living God, the Emperor, had declared he was human. MacArthur ruled Japan like a proconsul. His headquarters, the Daiichi building in Tokyo, looked across the moat at the imperial palace. A symbolic arrangement showing the old power and the new facing each other. The occupation lasted nearly 7 years. It changed everything. MacArthur's team rewrote the Constitution in a week. It was drafted by young American lawyers, typed by secretaries, translated into Japanese. The emperor became a symbol of state with no political power. Sovereignty rested with the people. A Bill of Rights guaranteed freedom of speech, assembly, and religion. Women got the right to vote. Article 9 was MacArthur's innovation. It stated that aspiring sincerely to an international peace based on justice and order, The Japanese people forever renounce war as a sovereign right of the nation and the threat or use of force as means of settling international disputes. Japan would never again have an army, a navy, or an air force. It would never again wage war. The Constitution took effect in 1947. It has never been amended. Land reform followed. The great landlords who had dominated the countryside for centuries were forced to sell. Their land was distributed to tenant farmers. Rural poverty, the breeding ground of militarism, was eliminated. Labor unions, once suppressed, now flourished. Workers gained the right to strike, to organize, to bargain collectively. The occupation encouraged them as a counterweight to the old power structure. War crimes trials were held in Tokyo. 7 leaders, including General Tojo Hideki, were hanged. Thousands were purged from public office. The militarists were silenced. But MacArthur made one crucial decision. He kept the emperor. Hirohito was not tried, not removed. He became the symbol of continuity, the face of the new Japan. Critics called it a deal with the devil. MacArthur called it practical politics. Without the emperor, he said, Japan would descend into chaos. In 1950, war broke out in Korea. The American army needed supplies. Japanese factories, which had built 0 fighters just 5 years earlier, now built trucks and ammunition for the UN forces. Money poured in. The economy stirred. By 1952, when the occupation ended, Japan was on its feet. Not yet prosperous, but alive. What followed was called the economic miracle. Growth rates of 10% per year. New industries in electronics, automobiles, optics. Sony sold the first transistor radio in 1955. Toyota began exporting cars. Honda built motorcycles that conquered the world. The government guided the economy. Foreigners called it Japan Incorporated. Bureaucrats and businessmen cooperated. Banks lent money cheaply. Workers gave loyalty in exchange for lifetime employment. Unions cooperated in exchange for job security. In 1964, Tokyo hosted the Olympics. The world saw a new Japan with bullet trains racing at 200 kilometers per hour, gleaming highways, modern architecture. The image of feudal Japan was gone. In its place stood technology, efficiency, prosperity. By 1968, Japan had the second largest economy in the world. Only America was bigger. The miracle was complete. Part 9. The Lost Decades and New Challenges. The 1990s began with a crash. The bubble economy, inflated by decades of speculation, by land prices that made Tokyo worth more than the entire United States, by stocks that only went up, burst. The Nikkei index lost half its value. Real estate prices collapsed. Banks held trillions in bad loans. Companies closed. Unemployment, which Japan had never known, appeared on the streets. They called it the Lost Decade. It stretched into 3. The economy stopped growing. Young people could not find stable jobs. They became freeters, part-time workers without benefits, without security, without hope. Entire generations grew up believing their lives would be worse than their parents. In 1995, 2 shocks hit the country. In January, the Great Hanshin earthquake struck Kobe. 6,000 died. The city, built to modern standards, collapsed like a house of cards. The government response was slow. The people learned they could not rely on authority. In March, a religious cult called Aum Shinrikyo released sarin gas in the Tokyo subway. 12 died, thousands were injured. The leader, Shoko Asahara, had recruited Japan's brightest young scientists and engineers. They built chemical weapons in laboratories. The country realized that even safety was no longer guaranteed. March 11th, 2011. The Tohoku earthquake struck with magnitude 9.0, the strongest in Japanese history and the fourth strongest ever recorded anywhere. A tsunami taller than a 5-story building swept the coast. Waves pushed miles inland, carrying cars, ships, houses, bodies. The Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant melted down. 3 reactors, radiation releases, evacuations, exclusion zones that remain empty today. 18,000 died, entire communities washed away. Japan rose again. Volunteers poured into the disaster zone. Construction crews rebuilt roads and towns. Fukushima is slowly being dismantled in a process that will take 40 years. The memory remains, the fear remains, and the question of, for what, remains. Meanwhile, Japanese culture conquered the world without firing a shot. Pokémon, Naruto, Dragon Ball, anime and manga became a universal language for teenagers everywhere. Studio Ghibli films, Miyazaki's masterpieces, won Oscars. Japanese food, including sushi, ramen and wagyu, became global cuisine. Japanese fashion, Japanese design, Japanese video games. Soft power wielded with genius. Today's Japan faces unprecedented challenges. The population is aging. Japan has the highest life expectancy in the world at 84 years. It has the lowest birth rate at 1.3 children per woman. The population peaked in 2008. Since then, it has declined by millions. By 2060, there will be 40 million fewer Japanese. Young people don't marry, they don't have children. They can't afford it. They don't see a future. They retreat into virtual worlds, into anime, into video games. The government offers cash incentives. It doesn't matter. Immigration rises slowly. Brazilians of Japanese descent, Vietnamese workers, Filipino nurses. But the society, so homogeneous for so long, struggles to accept outsiders. The language barrier is immense, the cultural barrier deeper. Robots replace humans in caring for the elderly. Artificial intelligence writes poetry in the style of medieval masters. In Kyoto temples, robotic priests chant sutras. The future arrives, but the past does not let go. Part 10. Japan Today, Between Tradition and the Future. In the rock garden of Ryoanji, 15 stones rest in white gravel. From any angle, you see only 14. One is always hidden. The monks say that this symbolizes the incomprehensibility of the world. Japan is like that garden. We see part, but the whole escapes. Ancient and new, warlike and peaceful, open and closed. It continues to change, remaining itself. At the Shibuya crossing in Tokyo, the crowd surges in waves at the busiest pedestrian intersection in the world. Neon signs, giant screens, smartphones. Young people in the latest fashion cross with the light. Among them, an old woman in kimono walks slowly. No one makes way, no one looks. She raises her eyes to the skyscrapers, then lowers them and walks toward a temple hidden behind glass buildings. The Showa era ended in 1989. The Heisei era, meaning achieving peace, ended in 2019. The new era is Reiwa, meaning beautiful harmony. The name is taken from an ancient anthology of poems. The emperor is the 126th in an unbroken line. Japan continues. The challenges are immense, but the resilience is deeper. In a small restaurant in a Tokyo backstreet, an old man serves ramen. He is 78. His father started the shop in 1947. The recipe hasn't changed. The soup simmers for 3 days. The noodles are made by hand. Customers come from across the city. He says that everything changes, but the broth stays the same. The broth of Japan, its spirit, has simmered for 2,000 years. Through earthquakes and tsunamis, through war and peace, through isolation and opening, it will survive this era too, whatever comes next. On a hillside in Kyoto, cherry blossoms bloom. The trees were planted 400 years ago. They have seen everything. They bloom each spring regardless. People come to watch, to picnic, to photograph. For a few days, they forget the future. They live in the present. The blossoms fall. The cycle repeats. Japan repeats, and endures, and waits. The sun rises over the Pacific. It sets over the Sea of Japan. In between, 126 million people live their lives. They work, they love, they mourn, they hope. They are the heirs of the gods, the descendants of warriors, the builders of the future. The story is not over. It never ends.